My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 45 years, I was Arthur Vance's wife. That was the title that defined me, the one I wore with more pride than any other. Now, at 68, I am his widow. It's a colder, sharper-edged word, one that doesn't sit quite right on my shoulders. We built our life in the quiet, tree-lined avenues of Port Blossom, a city that hums with the gentle rhythm of the tides, its historic heart a tapestry of cobblestone and wrought iron. We raised 3 children here, Caroline, Thomas, and Robert, in a sprawling house that always seemed to be filled with the scent of baking bread and the sound of Arthur's quiet laughter. After Arthur passed, the house grew cavernous, the silence a physical weight. The holidays, once a time of boisterous, chaotic joy, loomed like a storm front on the horizon. This Christmas, 6 months after his funeral, felt particularly desolate. I decided, with a surge of desperate hope, that I would mend the fraying threads of our family. I would gather my children, my grandchildren, and weave us back together with the sheer force of my will and a lavish dinner. The reservation was at the Gilded Sparrow, the kind of place Arthur and I had saved for milestone anniversaries. The soft glow of its chandeliers, the hushed clinking of silver on porcelain, it was the epitome of celebration. I paid the $1,200 deposit without a second thought. At my age, I'd come to believe that moments were more valuable than money. Or so I told myself, ignoring the small, persistent voice that reminded me I was trying to buy the affection of people who rationed it out like a scarce commodity. I spent 3 days preparing, not just for the dinner, but for the role I was to play, the cherished matriarch at the head of her loving family. I chose my dress with painstaking care, a deep emerald velvet that Arthur had always said made my eyes look like sea glass. I fastened the simple gold locket he'd given me for our 40th anniversary, his picture nestled beside mine. My hands trembled as I worked the clasp, a tremor I attributed to anticipation, though a cold knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. The calls began at 3 o'clock, just as the winter sun was beginning to cast long, golden shadows across my living room floor. "Mom, I am so sorry." Caroline's voice was a confection of syrupy regret. "Little Sophie has just come down with a dreadful stomach bug. We can't possibly risk bringing her out and infecting everyone. You understand, don't you?" Caroline, my eldest, had mastered that tone of solicitous dismissal. Sophie was her youngest, my granddaughter, a bright spark of a girl I hadn't seen in nearly 3 months. "Of course, dear," I heard myself say, the words automatic, conditioned. "Is there anything I can do?" "Oh no, we'll manage. We'll just have a quiet night in. We'll do a rain check, I promise." A rain check. As if a family's first Christmas without its patriarch was a game of bridge to be postponed. 20 minutes later, my son Thomas called. "Mom, listen. A crisis at the firm. This merger is threatening to unravel, and I have to be here to stitch it back together. You know how it is." I did know. Thomas's career in finance had been a series of ever more important crises for the past 30 years, each one conveniently coinciding with a family obligation he wished to avoid. "What about Amelia and the children?" I asked, referring to his wife and my other 2 grandchildren. "They're actually going to pop over to Caroline's. You know, to help out with Sophie and keep the other kids entertained while she's so ill." A beat of silence. It's a madhouse over there. A cold dread seeped into my bones. "So, they're all together?" "Well, yes, but it's not a party or anything. Just family helping family. Nothing planned." The words hung in the air between us, a lie so thin it was transparent. The final call was from Robert, my youngest, my baby. His excuse was the most elaborate. A sudden and catastrophic engine failure on the highway. He was stranded, waiting for a tow truck that wouldn't arrive for hours. He sounded genuinely distressed, a performance he had perfected since childhood. I sat in my armchair, the velvet of my dress soft against my skin, the gold locket feeling heavy and cold. 3 children, 3 perfectly coordinated excuses, delivered with the precision of a military operation. The cruelty was breathtaking in its efficiency. But the deposit was paid. The dress was on. And the thought of sitting alone in the echoing silence of my house was infinitely worse than the prospect of sitting alone in a crowded restaurant. So I drove to the Gilded Sparrow. It was as beautiful as I remembered, a warm, glittering jewel box filled with the music of laughter and conversation. Families were everywhere, tables crowded with generations sharing food and stories. The hostess, a young woman with kind eyes, looked at me with a flicker of gentle pity when I confirmed that yes, the table for 7 would now just be for 1. "Would you prefer a smaller table, ma'am?" she asked softly. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "This one is fine." I sat at the head of the long, empty table, a solitary queen on a deserted island. I ordered a bottle of the full-bodied Cabernet that Arthur had loved, the one we'd discovered on a trip to Napa Valley. The waiter poured a glass without comment, for which I was deeply grateful. I ordered appetizers I couldn't finish, and an entree I had no appetite for, trying to fill the vast, empty space with plates since I could not fill it with people. The breaking point arrived with the dessert menu. At the table next to mine, a family was celebrating. A grandmother, her face alight with joy, was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, a treasured son at the center of her own solar system. They laughed at a shared joke, and the sound was like a physical blow. The tears began then. Not loud, messy sobs, but silent, hot tears that slipped down my cheeks and onto the pristine white tablecloth. I was dabbing at my eyes with a linen napkin, my carefully constructed composure shattering like fine crystal, when I heard the sound of running footsteps and a commotion at the entrance. Grandma Eleanor, Leo, my grandson, burst through the elegant dining room. He was 17, his face flushed from the cold and from some powerful, roiling emotion. His dark, wavy hair was a mess, his coat unbuttoned as if he'd thrown it on in a desperate hurry. Diners turned to stare. The maitre d' moved to intercept him, but Leo dodged around him, his eyes locked on me. "Leo?" I stood, my heart hammering with confusion. "What are you doing here? I thought you were with your mother." He was breathing hard, catching his breath as he reached my table. In his hand, he clutched a thick manila envelope. His eyes, the same deep brown as his father's, were bright with unshed tears. "I had to find you," he gasped, his voice cracking. I couldn't let them do this to you." "Do what, sweetheart? What's happened?" He glanced around at the curious faces, then lowered his voice, his gaze fixed on the envelope. "They're all together, Grandma. At Marco's Trattoria, just a few blocks away. They've been planning it for weeks." My knees felt weak, and I sank back into my chair. "Planning what?" Leo's jaw tightened in a way that was so reminiscent of Arthur when he was angry it made my chest ache. "This dinner wasn't the real plan. They needed you out of the house tonight. Because of this." He held up the envelope. I stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "What is that?" "It's from Grandpa Arthur's lawyer. It arrived at Mom's house this afternoon." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "It's his will, Grandma. And there's something else." He pulled out the chair beside me, the one that should have been occupied by his mother, Caroline. "They dragged me to Marco's, said it was a family meeting about managing Grandma Eleanor's future." But when the lawyer started reading, Leo's hands were shaking as he placed the envelope on the table. "It's all yours, Grandma. The house in Port Blossom, the lake house, the investments, everything. Grandpa left it all to you." The sounds of the restaurant faded to a dull roar. That's as it should be, darling. I was his wife. Why would that upset them? Because they've been telling everyone, investors, friends, me, that Grandpa was leaving the bulk of the estate to them. Mom was already getting quotes to remodel the lake house. Uncle Thomas was counting on the investments for a new business venture. Uncle Robert was planning to sell off some assets to clear his debts. My mouth was suddenly dry. How long have they known the will reading was today?" "Weeks," Leo said, his voice raw. "But there's more, Grandma. There's something else in here. The real reason they didn't want you there." He reached inside the envelope and pulled out a sheaf of papers, the letterhead from a medical laboratory. "It's a DNA test, Grandma. Grandpa had it done just before he got sick." I took the papers, my fingers numb. The scientific jargon swam before my eyes, but the conclusion was starkly, brutally clear. It was a comparison of Leo's DNA to my own family line. "I don't understand," I whispered. Leo's voice was barely audible. "I'm not your grandson, Grandma Eleanor. Not by blood. Mom adopted me when I was a baby. She told everyone I was the son of a distant cousin who died. It was a lie. She's been using me for 16 years, using me to get money from you and Grandpa, pretending I was your blood. The papers slipped from my grasp and fluttered to the floor. My hand, reaching for my water glass, knocked over the wine instead. A tide of deep, dark red spread across the white linen, a stark and bloody stain. Everything I had built my life upon, my family, my identity as a mother and grandmother, was crumbling to dust around me. But as I looked into the eyes of this boy, this stranger who was more familiar to me than my own children, who had run through the cold city streets to bring me the truth, I felt the first tremor of something new. Something that might, after all these years of illusion, finally be real. Leo helped me to the powder room, a quiet, marble-lined sanctuary. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the ornate mirror. The woman who looked back was a stranger. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes wide with shock, her face etched with a grief deeper than the one I felt for my husband. But there was something else in those eyes, too. A flicker of light in a room that had been dark for a very long time. When we returned to the table, a fresh cloth had been laid. I insisted Leo order something to eat. As he picked at a plate of pasta, he told me everything, his voice steady now, as if unburdening himself of this long-held secret had given him a new strength. Mr. Davies' office was so formal, he began. All dark wood and leather-bound books. Mom and my uncles were sitting there looking so smug, like they were about to be handed the keys to a kingdom. I refilled my own wine glass, my hand surprisingly steady. How long did they know about this meeting? Mom got the notice a month ago. She made this whole big show of being sad, saying how hard it was to deal with Grandpa's affairs so close to the holidays. But I could tell she was thrilled. She kept talking about the lake house, how it needed a complete overhaul to bring it into the 21st century. The lake house. Arthur and I had bought it with the bonus from his first big promotion. It was our haven, a rustic, peaceful place where we'd spent summers reading on the screened-in porch, watching the loons on the water. The thought of Caroline gutting its warm, wooden heart and replacing it with granite and stainless steel made me feel physically ill. What happened when the lawyer began? Mr. Davies started reading, and at first, it was all standard. Small bequests to a few charities, some personal items. But then he got to the major assets. The Port Blossom house, the lake house, the investment portfolio, the savings, and one by one, he read the clause, I give, devise, and bequeath, absolutely and in its entirety, to my beloved wife, Eleanor Vance. I could see it perfectly, the confident smiles on my children's faces slowly curdling into disbelief. Mom's face went chalk white. Leo continued. Uncle Thomas started arguing, saying there must be a mistake, that Dad had made promises. Uncle Robert just sat there, his mouth hanging open like a fish. And Mr. Davies? He was very calm. He just said the will was ironclad, updated 6 months before Grandpa passed away. He said everything goes to you, with one condition. If anything should happen to you, the estate bypasses them entirely and is divided equally among the grandchildren. That was Arthur. Always the protector, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Even from beyond the grave, he was shielding me. But then, Leo's voice dropped. Mr. Davies pulled out another envelope. He said Grandpa had left it with instructions that it was only to be opened in the event of a dispute, or if any questions about familial legitimacy were raised. My heart began to pound. The DNA test. Right. Mr. Davies said Grandpa had grown concerned. He'd overheard conversations, talk about money, plans being made after he was gone. He wanted to ensure his assets went to the people he truly considered his family. I thought back to those last months. Arthur had been quieter, more observant. I had chalked it up to the illness, to his fatigue. But he hadn't been fading, he'd been watching. He'd been seeing the things my love had made me blind to. So, the lawyer opened it? Leo nodded. He read the summary of the DNA results. It said I shared no genetic markers with the Vance family line. And then he read a summary from a private investigator Grandpa had hired. A private investigator? The words were a choked whisper. Yeah. The report detailed how Mom faked my adoption records. The story about the distant cousin was a complete fabrication. She adopted me through a private arrangement with a young woman who couldn't care for me. There is no blood relation to this family at all. I leaned back, the air knocked out of me. But why? Why lie about something like that? Leo let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded far too old for a 17-year-old. Money, Grandma. It was always about money. Mom knew you and Grandpa had a soft spot for a tragic story, especially one involving a child. So she invented the perfect one, the poor, orphaned great-nephew who needed a loving home and a family to support him. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. All the checks I'd written over the years. School uniforms, summer camps, orthodontic work, tutoring. Each request from Caroline had been accompanied by a story of her financial struggles, her single motherhood hardships. I had been happy to help, proud to give my grandson every advantage. How much? I asked, my voice thin. The investigator's report had an estimate. Just for my expenses, things she claimed were for me, it was close to $500,000 over 16 years. He paused, looking down at his hands. But that wasn't all of it. What else? He hesitated, as if afraid of dealing another blow. The report mentioned other things. The times Mom told you your memory was slipping and offered to help manage your bills. The emergency loans for Uncle Thomas's business that always seemed to coincide with a new car or a family vacation for them. Uncle Robert's gambling debts, which were always framed as a one-time family crisis. They hadn't just been lying about Leo. They had been systematically draining us for years, using my love and trust as their personal line of credit. Mom used to coach me before we'd visit, Leo said, his voice laced with a shame that wasn't his to bear. She'd tell me what to say, how to act grateful, how to subtly mention things I needed. I thought it was normal. I didn't understand until tonight that I was a prop in their play. I looked at this boy, this stranger who carried my husband's legacy of truth in a manila envelope. What happened after the lawyer finished? I asked gently. It was chaos. Mom was screaming that Grandpa must have been senile. Uncle Thomas was on the phone with his own lawyer before we even left the room. Uncle Robert just kept muttering, "It's not fair, it's not fair." And you? Leo finally met my eyes, his own gaze clear and unwavering. I just sat there thinking about all the times you bandaged my scraped knees, all the birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, the way you always asked about my art, my friends, like you actually cared. And I realized that, even if we're not related by blood, you've been more of a real grandmother to me than she has ever been a real mother. My throat constricted. Leo. They were so busy yelling and plotting how to contest the will, they didn't even see me leave. I just grabbed the envelope off the desk and ran. I knew where you'd be. I couldn't let you be alone tonight. You've been alone enough. Looking at him, his earnest face illuminated by the soft candlelight, I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I recognized as hope. Perhaps family wasn't about blood after all. Perhaps it was about who shows up when the world falls away. As I reached across the table to take his hand, a chilling thought surfaced. If my children were capable of this, of a decade-and-a-half-long deception, what else were they capable of? This wasn't just the end of a lie. It was the beginning of a war. And I had no idea what they were willing to do to win. The taxi ride back to my apartment was swathed in a thick, contemplative silence. Leo sat beside me, guarding the manila envelope as if it contained state secrets, which, in a way, it did. His occasional worried glances in my direction told me he feared I might still reject him, a casualty of the war his mother had started. "You'll stay the night, of course," I said as the taxi pulled up to my building. "We can figure out the rest tomorrow." He nodded, a wave of relief washing over his young features. "My mom's probably going to be calling." "Let her," I said, with a surprising amount of steel in my voice. Inside the familiar quiet of my apartment, I put the kettle on. Leo sat at my small kitchen table, the rigid set of his shoulders finally softening. In the warm, gentle light, he looked impossibly young, burdened by secrets he should never have had to carry. "How long did you suspect?" I asked, placing a steaming mug of chamomile tea in front of him. "About the adoption?" He wrapped his hands around the mug, his gaze lost in the rising steam. "I've had a feeling for years. But I only knew for sure tonight. It was always small things, things that didn't quite add up. Like what? Medical history, mostly. When I was 12, I had appendicitis. The doctors at the hospital kept asking about our family's medical history, heart disease, cancer. Every time they asked, Mom would get this tight, panicked look. She'd give different answers each time. Sometimes she'd say my biological parents died too young for anyone to know. Other times she'd invent traits I'd supposedly inherited from your side of the family, but the stories were never consistent. I thought of all the times I'd looked at Leo and marveled at his differences. His dark, wavy hair in our family of straight-laced blondes and brunettes. His quiet, artistic soul in a family of pragmatic, loud people. I had called these differences a miracle, a wonderful genetic surprise. They were, in fact, a clue I had been too trusting to see. And then there were the phone calls, Leo continued. I'd overhear her talking to Uncle Thomas or Uncle Robert when she thought I was out of earshot. Whispers about keeping up the pretense or as long as the old folks don't find out. That must have been so confusing for you as a child. It was. I didn't understand what they were hiding. Lots of kids are adopted. But as I got older, I started to see the pattern. What pattern? He took a slow sip of tea. Every time you and Grandpa did something generous, a big Christmas present, a check for a school trip, Mom would get this look on her face. A kind of smug satisfaction. And she always made me call and thank you personally, feeding me the exact words to say to make you feel appreciated and loved. My heart ached with a new kind of pain. This boy hadn't just been lied to, he'd been trained as an instrument of manipulation. Did you understand what she was doing? Not at first. I just thought she was teaching me good manners. But by the time I was a teenager, I saw it clearly. I saw how she used me. If she wanted to ask for money for school fees, she'd make sure I was wearing my scruffiest shoes when we visited. If she wanted a new car, she'd talk for weeks beforehand about how unreliable her old one was and how she worried about driving me around in it. He was a pawn in her long, drawn-out chess game. The worst part was, his voice broke slightly, the worst part was that I really did love visiting you and Grandpa. That part was never fake. You were the only people who ever asked me what I was thinking, who looked at my drawings and didn't just say, "That's nice," before changing the subject. You saw me. That single sentence shattered something deep inside me. While I had been mourning the loss of a biological grandson, this child had been starved for the very love I had been so freely, if foolishly, giving. Leo, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I need you to hear this. Our love for you was never, not for 1 second, about biology. It was about you. His eyes, so much like my Robert's, but so much more honest, filled with the tears he'd been fighting all night. I always hoped that was true. But I was never sure. Well, now you can be. We sat in a comfortable quiet for a moment before he spoke again, his voice low. There's something else. Something I overheard tonight when I went back to the house to grab a few things before coming to find you. My sense of dread returned. What did you hear? They were on a conference call with Uncle Thomas's lawyer. They were planning their strategy to contest the will. Not just by claiming Grandpa was incompetent. They want to paint me as a fraudulent party to the family. What does that mean? It means, he said, his hands trembling slightly, they're going to throw me to the wolves. Their legal strategy is to argue that since I'm not a blood relative, any money or support you and Grandpa gave me was obtained through deception. They think if they can prove fraud on Mom's part, they can invalidate the portions of the will that protect you. The absolute, calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. They were willing to brand a 17-year-old boy a conspirator in a fraud to get their hands on Arthur's money. It gets worse, Grandma. They were talking about you. About having you declared mentally unfit. The room seemed to tilt. What? Uncle Thomas was saying that your decision to invite me to stay with you, even after learning the truth, could be used as proof of your impaired judgment and emotional vulnerability. They think if they can get a judge to declare you incompetent, the court will appoint them as your legal guardians. They would control everything. My own children. My flesh and blood. They were not just willing to disown the boy they had raised, they were preparing to strip me of my home, my freedom, and my dignity. Did they see you? No, I was listening from my bedroom. I heard enough. They're meeting the lawyer again tomorrow morning to start filing the paperwork. Mom was already talking about which of her doctor friends might be willing to write an affidavit about your cognitive decline. I looked at Leo, at the premature weight of the world on his young shoulders, and I felt a profound and surprising calm settle over me. There is a strange liberation in hitting rock bottom. When you have nothing left to lose, you lose your fear. My children had shown me their hand. They had revealed the absolute depths of their greed. They could take no more from me emotionally. All that was left to protect was my life and the life of this boy who had become my only true ally. Leo, I said, my voice infused with a strength I hadn't known I possessed. How would you feel about helping me checkmate them? For the first time all night, a genuine smile touched his lips, lighting up his tired face. I'd feel like, for the first time, someone in this family is actually fighting for what's right. Good, I said, reaching for the phone and my old address book. Because we have an early appointment with Mr. Davies. And then, we're taking a drive to the lake. I have a feeling your grandfather left us more than just a will. I think he left us a battle plan. Arthur had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone. If I knew my husband, and I knew him better than I knew myself, his final act of love wouldn't just be a shield. It would be a sword. And it was time I learned how to wield it. The next morning, I woke with a piercing clarity I hadn't felt in years. Leo was asleep on the sofa, wrapped in Arthur's old patchwork quilt, the troubled lines on his forehead smoothed away in slumber. As soon as Mr. Davies' office opened, I was on the phone. Mrs. Vance, his secretary said, her voice warm with familiarity. Mr. Davies was hoping you'd call. He has some additional materials from your husband. His instructions were to release them to you personally, in the event of a formal challenge to the will. More materials. Arthur, my brilliant, careful Arthur. We took a taxi to the downtown office, a place of quiet dignity that felt like a bastion of integrity in a world that had suddenly gone crooked. James Davies was a man of Arthur's generation, with kind, discerning eyes and the unhurried patience of one who has seen families at their best and their absolute worst. Eleanor, he said, rising as we entered. And you must be Leo. Your grandfather was very fond of you. Leo's head snapped up. He was. Immensely, Mr. Davies affirmed, gesturing for us to sit. And very concerned for your future. Which brings us to this. He slid another, much thicker, manila envelope across the polished mahogany of his desk. Arthur began preparing this portfolio nearly 2 years ago. He hoped it would never be necessary. Given the events of yesterday, I believe it is. With trembling hands, I opened the clasp. Inside was a meticulously organized collection of documents, photographs, bank statements, and what appeared to be transcripts of recorded phone calls. Arthur engaged a private investigator, Mr. Davies explained gently. He had grown suspicious of the constant emergencies and financial requests from your children. The first photo showed Caroline, my daughter, exiting a high-end day spa, looking relaxed and radiant. The timestamp was from 3 days after a tearful phone call in which she'd claimed she was working double shifts as a nurse just to afford Leo's school textbooks. The next showed Thomas at a lavish business dinner, champagne on ice, at a restaurant known for its exorbitant prices. The attached receipt was for nearly $1,500. He'd borrowed $5,000 from us that same week for what he'd called an urgent, unforeseen tax issue. Page after page, the evidence mounted. Bank statements showing deposits from our accounts followed by immediate withdrawals for designer clothing, luxury car payments, and 5-star resort vacations. The $500,000 for Leo's needs was just the tip of the iceberg. The total, documented drain on our life savings was nearly double that. There are also audio recordings, Mr. Davies said, pushing a small digital player toward me. Arthur began insisting on using a speakerphone for family calls, claiming his hearing was failing. He was, in fact, recording them. I put the earbuds in, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm. The first recording was from a few months before Arthur's final decline. It was a family meeting my children had requested to discuss my future. Caroline's voice, slick with false concern. Dad, we're just worried about Mom. She's getting so forgetful. Living in that big house all alone. Arthur's voice, weary but firm. Your mother's mind is as sharp as it ever was. Thomas's voice, resonating with faux authority. Of course, but we need to be proactive. Perhaps it's time one of us was added to her accounts, given power of attorney, just to help her manage things. Financial matters can be so stressful for a woman her age. A woman her age. As if I were a fragile doll, not the woman who had managed our household finances for 45 years. The recording continued, a sickening symphony of manipulation. They spoke of my competence in the past tense, discussing my assets as if they were already theirs to manage. They painted a portrait of a declining, helpless widow who needed to be protected from herself. The most chilling part was how reasonable they made it sound, cloaking their avarice in the language of love. When it ended, I sat in stunned silence. There are more than a dozen recordings, Mr. Davies said. All of them demonstrating a coordinated, long-term effort to undermine your authority and gain control of your finances. Arthur saw it all, and it made him furious. He passed me another document, a summary of a plan Arthur had drafted, titled, Protocol for the Protection of Eleanor Vance. It was a brilliant, multi-layered legal fortress. He anticipated every move they might make, Mr. Davies explained. The will contains a no-contest clause. Any beneficiary who challenges the terms automatically forfeits their inheritance. He also established a trust that becomes active the moment anyone files a petition questioning your competency. It immediately transfers all assets to an independent, third-party trustee, cutting off any possibility of them gaining control. Leo, reading over my shoulder, let out a low whistle. Your grandfather, Mr. Davies said with a small, sad smile, was a formidable man. But he left one last thing. A personal letter. For you to open only when you had seen the full truth. He handed me a sealed, cream-colored envelope. In Arthur's familiar, strong script, it read, For my Eleanor. When you're ready to fight. As I broke the seal, I knew Arthur hadn't just left me an inheritance. He had left me an arsenal. He had left me the validation I didn't know I needed and the strength I had forgotten I had. My children thought they were predators circling a weakened target. They had no idea they were walking into a trap set by a lion. The 2-hour drive to Serenity Lake was a pilgrimage. With each familiar bend in the road, I felt I was journeying not just through the countryside, but back to myself. Arthur's letter rested on the seat beside me, its contents a balm and a beacon. The lake house stood as a testament to simpler, happier times, its cedar siding weathered to a soft silver gray. Inside, it smelled of pine needles and old books, the scent of our shared history. In Arthur's study, surrounded by his books and the faint, lingering scent of his pipe tobacco, I sat in his worn leather chair and read his letter again. My dearest Eleanor, it began. If you are reading this, then they have finally shown you their true faces, and your heart is broken. For that, I am endlessly sorry. I saw their greed blossoming years ago, but I stayed silent. I saw how you needed to believe in the goodness of the children you raised, and I could not bring myself to be the one to shatter that belief. That was my weakness, and I have regretted it every day. But you must not, for one moment, believe this is your failure. It is theirs. You gave them a foundation of love, and they saw it only as a floor to stand on while they reached for more. You are not responsible for the people they chose to become. The woman I married was a force of nature. Strong, brilliant, and full of a fire that could warm a whole house. Over the years, you allowed their needs and their criticisms to bank that fire, to shrink your world until it fit inside the narrow confines of what they wanted from you. This letter, my love, is your permission to stoke those embers back to a roaring flame. The estate is yours, completely and without condition. Do with it as you see fit. Sell everything and travel the world like we always planned. Or stay and build a new life on the foundations of the old. The choice is yours alone. As for Leo, I knew about his adoption for the last year of my life. The investigator confirmed it. But in that year, I also confirmed what I already knew in my heart. That boy has more integrity and love in his little finger than our 3 children have in their entire bodies. He is a Vance in spirit, which is the only thing that has ever mattered. In the safe behind my university diploma, you will find the details of a separate educational trust established for him. He has earned it. You will also find the deed to the 5-acre lot next to this one. I bought it years ago, dreaming of building a small guest cottage for our golden years. Build it, Eleanor. Build something beautiful that is entirely, unapologetically yours. They will come back to you. When their legal challenges fail, they will come with apologies and tears. Do not be fooled. Their remorse will not be for the pain they caused you, but for the inheritance they have lost. You owe them nothing. Not your time, not your forgiveness, not your peace. You have given them enough. Live, my Eleanor. Live fully. Live loudly. Live for yourself. You have always, always been enough. All my love, forever. Arthur. Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of catharsis, of profound, soul-deep love and recognition. Leo stood in the doorway, his own eyes glistening. He was amazing, he whispered. Yes, I said, folding the letter and holding it to my chest. He was. I walked to the wall, found the combination, our anniversary, and opened the safe. Inside, just as he'd said, were the trust documents for Leo and the deed to the adjoining land. Arthur hadn't just protected me, he had given me a blueprint for a future. I picked up the phone. I had 3 calls to make. They would be short, they would be final, and they would be the sound of my own quiet, long overdue liberation. 6 months later, I stood on the wide, welcoming porch of the lake house, a mug of coffee warming my hands. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn. Next door, the guest cottage was nearly complete, a beautiful, light-filled structure of cedar and glass that Leo had designed himself. After the storm of revelations, he had transferred to the local high school for his final semester and had not only graduated with honors, but had been accepted into a prestigious architecture program, his tuition fully covered by Arthur's foresight. He had chosen to stay with me, and in doing so, we had chosen each other. We had become a family of 2. The calls to my children had been as liberating as I had imagined. Caroline had wept. Mother, you can't do this. We're your family. A family doesn't orchestrate a multi-year deception to defraud its own parents, Caroline, I had replied, my voice calm and clear. A family doesn't plot to have its mother declared incompetent. You made your choices. These are the consequences. Thomas had blustered. This is that boy's doing. He's poisoned you against us. Leo showed me the truth, Thomas. You showed me your greed. I am simply choosing truth. Robert had pleaded, the most pathetic of the 3. But what are we supposed to do, Mom? I imagine, I'd said, feeling a pang of pity but no longer the urge to rescue him. You will have to do what other people do, Robert. You will have to live within your means. They had tried everything since. Barrages of legal challenges, all of which were summarily dismissed thanks to Arthur's ironclad preparations. Then came the unwanted bouquets, the maudlin letters, the unannounced visits. But the walls of my new life were strong, built of self-respect and reinforced by the love of my late husband. My life, once shrunken and quiet, had expanded in the most unexpected ways. My new chosen family was a patchwork quilt of warm, genuine souls. Margaret, the widow from down the road, who brought over fresh-baked scones and shared my love for gardening. Dr. Evans, the town's semi-retired physician, who'd stop by for a game of chess. And Leo, the grandson of my heart, whose quiet presence and creative energy had filled the house with a gentle, joyful light. This was my life now. It wasn't a grand performance for an audience of ungrateful relatives. It was a quiet, authentic existence, rich with simple pleasures and real connections. As I stood on the porch that morning, watching the mist rise off Serenity Lake, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Mr. Davies' daughter, who had taken over the practice. Mrs. Vance, she said warmly, I just wanted to let you know that the final provision of your husband's estate was executed today. As per his instructions, a significant donation has been made to the Port Blossom Children's Hospital and the local Arts Council. A donation? Yes, a very generous one. He stipulated that it was to be made anonymously, but with one condition, that the new wing of the hospital be named the Eleanor Vance Pavilion for Healing. I sank into one of the porch rockers, the phone slipping from my hand. Even now, he was still taking care of me. Not just protecting my finances, but burnishing my name, my legacy, ensuring that the world saw me not as a victim, but as a pillar of the community I called home. Leo came out onto the porch, handing me a fresh sheet of drawing paper. It was a sketch of me, sitting in the rocker, a small, peaceful smile on my face, the rising sun illuminating the silver in my hair. "What are you thinking about, Grandma?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. I looked at him, this remarkable young man who had been the catalyst for my rebirth. I looked at the cottage he had designed, the lake that held so many memories, and the future that stretched before us, clear and bright. "I was thinking," I said, my voice full of a peace I had once thought unattainable, "that blood makes you related, but loyalty, Leo, loyalty makes you family." He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. We sat in comfortable silence, the silence not of emptiness, but of contentment. The story of my heartbreak had become the story of my liberation. It was a painful journey, but it had led me home, not to a place, but to myself. Now I find myself sharing this story, not for pity, but for connection. I'm curious about you, the person listening to my journey. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to redraw the boundaries of your own family to find your peace? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories remind me that none of us are truly alone in our struggles or our triumphs. Thank you for listening.